I come from a background of improvisation, and there's a whole yes and aesthetic of you have to discover it together and you have to support the creative choices and heighten the creative choices that your partners are doing. As a director, you have a very light touch and you let things unfold and you really just put the ingredients together and the thing glides and lands, hopefully on the bullseye. Hi, I'm Jon Favreau. I've now directed 10 films, and here are some thoughts on each and every one of them. Made was filmed kind of on the heels of Swingers. Swingers was the first thing that I wrote, and it was a film that put Vince Vaughn and myself on the map.
You know what, you probably could have hit that if you didn't have to take us home.
Definitely, it's not like that.
Don't give me that shit, Mike. I think she liked you.
I know she liked me.
I really do.
Shut up, okay? I know she liked me. I just didn't want to do anything tonight.
I had met Vince on Rudy, where we're both actors. And then I wrote the script for Swingers for both of us, but especially inspired by his persona, his creativity, his comedic rhythms. Immediately after even the dailies from Swingers came out, his talent was recognized by a lot of people, and people were very excited by what he could do. And then he went on to have, fantastic career, both in comedy and in drama. It was directed by Doug Liman, but it was a very small production, so it was a real creative partnership. The success of that, or the recognition that we gained, wasn't so much a commercial success, but it definitely opened up the doors for us to do more projects together. And Vince had really enjoyed a lot of success on the heels of Swingers, and used a lot of that clout to help us get this film greenlit. Very low budget film. We filmed it in Los Angeles, in New York. Grittier film. It was produced by Vince as well. I think what was nice about going from the process, the creative collaboration on Swingers into Made, was then he could really bring a lot more to bear as a producer, bringing in people like Chris Doyle, who had worked with a great cinematographer, who was working with Wong Kar-wai and did like Chungking Express, and then just playing into a different dynamic because it wasn't the same characters, it wasn't a sequel, but wanted to play into the chemistry. I always liked performing with him. He's so fast and funny and smart.
What happened to your money?
I have it. I have some stuff left.
How much money do you have left?
I got like $80 left.
80?
85. I got 5 in the room. I got
85
yeah.
bucks. What happened to the 1,500 max he gave
Well, you could have picked up a fucking tab once in a
I paid
while.
for half the fucking
Don't
drink.
And so it was like musicians who play with one another. And that came out of spending so much time together, both on the set of Rudy, through Swingers, into this. And then, of course, he was much more involved, again, in the editing process, and it was a real partnership. The scene that stands out to me the most, remembering, was the per diem scene.
Everything you need or need to know is in those envelopes. Do not.
On one side, you have Peter Falk.
Until you have left the office.
Often I'll try to use 2 cameras when there's going to be a lot of improv. We didn't get to do it in this set. It was a tight set. It was a real location. We didn't get to build anything. It's one of those great scenes where there's such a status difference between the 2 characters. So just from a comedy standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity for comedy to emerge. And also there's a lot of tension in the scene because we're finally getting our big shot talking to the boss.
I started opening it before I heard the rest. Do you mind if I borrow a piece of tape? Just that way I'll...
Open the fucking thing.
Up to the point in the movie, he's been pushing me to push for us to get a shot with this guy who's a big boss and to send us out on a first very low level job. I mean, that's all conceit of this is that, what's an entry level position? I always like that kind of Rosencrantz Guildenstern level of hero where you're trying to prove yourself. You don't really know what's going on. The vulnerability of those characters, I find inspiring. It's easy to write too.
You will not, for that matter, carry anything other than what I have just given you.
Keys?
What?
What about my house keys? Because that way I can get back in when I come in town.
Vince just found, what bits I wrote and then bits that he was adding. And of course, Peter Falk would go right back and forth. But the way Peter Falk would improvise wasn't for comedy. It was for the real. So he would always lean into what the characters were really feeling, which of course makes it even funnier.
You can carry your key.
Peter Falk, he's a guy that really is one of the Mount Rushmore figures of independent film. And to be able to work with him and have him improv with us, and knowing that he had worked with Cassavetes, and at that point we were all pretty young and new in our careers. And so to have this elder statesman there be a part of that was very memorable, and just getting to know the guy. Some of the biggest laughs, you could think of an independent film, but like Tarantino films, because the tension's so high and he knows how to break the tension and make it funny. So tension is your friend when you're trying to do comedy. It's very easy to get laughs.
Is there a pattern performing here?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is it?
You want us to be wherever you want us
Let him tell me.
No, don't worry about it. I got it.
Tell me, what is it?
I don't understand why you're picking on me, Mac.
And then on top of it, you throw on a really funny back and forth to the point that Peter Falk had an outburst and just starts screaming at him. But it was off camera. But it was so funny that we play his take, even though it's just audio, and it's just, you see our reaction.
I listed a lot of
Because you lost my fucking carpet cleaning van, and I don't like you, you cocksucker.
And that's one of those moments where something happened, we used it. It's such a rough type of style of film that you could get away with it. And so it was, for me as a director, it was a real learning exercise, how you could really, get a great cast and then take full advantage of what they bring to it. And it was a film that, again, didn't really break through commercially, but was a big step for us creatively. Elf.
You're a big boy. What's your name?
Paul.
And what can I get you for Christmas?
Don't tell him what you want. He's a liar.
Let the kid talk.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?
Just cool it, Zippy.
You sit on a throne of lies.
So by the time I was doing Elf, and it's such a meandering path, and I look back at it and it all feels very straight. But at the time, you're just kind of checking doorknobs, at what's open, what doors are open, what are closed. I had thought after Swingers, especially, Maid didn't really move the needle, but it did establish me as a director after being more of a collaborative creative on Swingers. I had some roles as an actor. I was on Friends. I had got in a few movies, got cut out of a few movies, actually before that. But what I was getting a lot of attention about was script development as a writer. In the case of Elf, there was a project with Will Ferrell attached, and there was a script, and I was hired to try to help get that script made. It was quite different tonally. I had come in with a take, and part of it was that if I could get this script greenlit, that I would get to direct this film. Will had been on SNL, so everybody knew how funny he was and talented, but he wasn't really a proven entity in movies yet. But he had already done Old School.
So good! Once it hits your lips, it's so good!
Vince was also in that, so I was on the set of that, and I knew he was hilarious. And I had gotten to know Will, and so I was doing rewrites, and I brought a different tone to the film. I knew we weren't going to have a lot of money to do it. I knew we couldn't have a lot of crazy visual effects, very expensive. But aesthetically, I thought my take was, what if it's not just a human that was raised by elves, but a human that lived in a 60s, like Rankin Bass style Christmas special that I grew up with. And it also opened the door for me to do stuff that I was interested in doing from a young age, which is like, I really loved visual effects and the illusion of visual effects, the magic trick of visual effects. I loved reading Starlog magazine. I loved hearing how they made the Wolfman transform in the old black and white movies. And in Elf, there was an opportunity also to do things like stop motion, forced perspective, all of these old school tools. Forced perspective, we were looking at Darby O'Gill and the Little People. I mean, that's going way back. We're using the same technology. You'd have little clues on how to do stuff like that. And forced perspective, for those who don't know, is you basically have two sets that line up perfectly at different scales. You light it so that they look like they're the same shot. The one that's supposed to appear big, like Will Ferrell at the North Pole, is closer to you. And then you have Bob Newhart, who's human size also, but he's on a much larger set further back. And when you put them together, Bob Newhart looks small, Will Ferrell looks big. That was, for me, the geekiness of getting to do that. And it was my first taste of CGI. I wasn't convinced that CGI could be executed well in all cases. As great as it was in Jurassic Park, there were a lot of films where it wasn't. It cost a lot. I didn't know a lot about it. I learned a lot by the reindeer, because we needed to use it for the reindeer. But for the most part, I wanted most of it to be analog and just feel old-fashioned and timeless and feel like this movie could have been cracked out of, a time capsule from when I was a kid. And the other thing was, we were filming it after the events of 9/11. There was a heaviness. And so to have a movie that we're filming in New York that brought the magic back to the city that I remember growing up.
Don't you know each cloud contains banners from heaven?
Hello.
You'll find your fortune falling all over town.
To have a completely controlled environment is very difficult and expensive and often doesn't look real. I love the energy, that feel of the real city. And we learned a lot of that from working with Doug on Swingers. His whole thing was, hey, let's go to real clubs. Let's really just dive in with a camera and capture almost that sort of semi-documentary feel. And The good thing about Will Ferrell, on the day, on the set, he delivers, and he would make something funny happen everywhere.
Macaroni, if you want the thing you love.
You did it! Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee.
I like the one where he's eating the gum.
It's upside down, we live up.
At that point, I had my son was tiny. And when your kid's small and they're like toddlers, you let them run around a little bit at the park and they come back chewing on something. You're like, what? You didn't have any food. I always thought it's funny that, he's like almost like how a dog will eat gum off the sidewalk. Concept was funny, but what made it really funny was Will, because Will just knew the timing and understood it. So when we went to film Buddy arriving in Manhattan, I kept thinking about that shot from Tootsie. When you first saw Dustin Hoffman walking down the street, it was a long lens shot, so you see all the heads bobbing up and down and just the layers and layers of New York, but because it's in a long lens, that character sticks out. You see them, but you feel the energy of the city. And I kept talking about that shot. And there we were with a small crew running around Manhattan. Okay, get out there in your elf suit, go walk. And I kept telling the cameraman next to me, there's a shot in Tootsie that I want to. And he says, yes, I know, I filmed that shot. So I said, always hire people who know more than you do.
It rains, and it's from heaven.
The movie like Elf has a big heart. And that's the music of John Debney. That's Greg's cinematography. That's Joe Bauer's visual effects. Bob Newhart's presence, the whole cast, Mary Steenburgen, James Caan. All of it works together. And ultimately, Will Ferrell, as funny as he is, and as much as he does, he could do over-the-top characters, there's a heart always that grounds his performances. Leaning into that, I think, really helped. And then a Christmas movie in New York and the message of it. And it was a big deal. I'm a kid from Queens, and I remember going down there on 6th Avenue, and there we were. And I had been an usher in a movie theater. I'd been a background performer in Chicago. I'd worked my way up to doing a supporting role, bit parts, and then finally getting into the Union, supporting role in Rudy, making my own things. Now here I am making a big Hollywood production in New York with trailers and trucks, and my parents could come and my friends could come and visit. And it felt like a dream. And that was one of the first moments where it just felt like a dream, having the sleigh shot that was going down and there with Mary Steenburgen and Jimmy Caan, Daniel Tay, and Zoe. That was one of those pinch me moments. Nobody expected anything from the film. It ended up surprising people. It stuck around. But the big thing I'm the most proud of is that it keeps coming back every year. And on social media every year, people start posting as Christmas approaches with them watching Elf or showing their little kid watching Elf for the first time in front of a TV. People all around the world sharing a good feeling. All the projects I've worked on, that one feels like it created like a little bit of a ripple on the pond in a positive way. Zathura. Now, on the heels of Elf, as you can imagine, people are approaching you to do lots of stuff. And Sony had come to me with this project that was a very high priority as it was characterized to me. Here's a script. You're getting it. You're going to read it. It's a follow-up to Jumanji. It was an existing piece of work, but it wasn't a piece of work that people knew that well. It was a picture book that was very short but beautiful illustrations. There were images of what these different cards were in the game, and it was space, and it was sort of pulpy, old school space stuff, which is an aesthetic. I like that nostalgic look. And then it became about all the things I could do with it. And I had the momentum of a studio that was really pushing for something. So unlike the other films where we had to kind of fight our way up from obscurity, it would be nice to have something where there's a budget and a set of expectations around it. So I wasn't fighting upstream. And then we told a story, and I think it's similar to like Maid or Swingers, where there's bickering siblings.
Your little baby!
Oh, jeez, it won't stop!
You start to see patterns in what you're drawn to in the comedy of the sort of heightening of that conflict. I got to work with Tim Robbins there as well. That was really cool. And I was working with CGI for the first time. We're definitely fighting against what the studio was advising because they want CG for everything. And I want to do a lot of practical. That opened up the door for a relationship with Stan Winston. an icon in visual effects, worked with probably most famously at the time was Jurassic Park for the animatronics on that. I wanted to do motion control miniatures, so the house is a miniature house. But I even wanted the Zorgons to be go motion. I had actually tried to reach out through my team to Phil Tippett to see if he still did like Dragon Slayer. Go motion is stop motion with motion blur, and I wanted to do them that way. So I was already still into like the old Harryhausen aesthetic, all that stuff. And with Elf, I had to fight very hard for stop motion. They kept asking me to cut it out. They didn't even like that part necessarily. It was always challenged. But I always liked deep down that it's a chance to play with these toys and learn from these people. And I also thought the aesthetic was really good for the movie, for the story. And so we had a lot of practical effects, a shaking house, a house on it that moved. And of course, the Zorgons, we didn't end up using stop motion, but Stan Winston's shop built these creatures. What we had designed it to disguise the human form, that the head would stick out the back. We'd paint that out. We had the robot, which was a rod puppet. So I started working with all those puppeteers on rod puppets. We had a miniature one. We had a big one. We got to play with scale, which is a big thing that I think film offers, that you could play with tiny things, big things. Great experience filming it. After Elf, I made the commitment that every film after that, I was going to base it in Los Angeles. So Zathura was the first one. We filmed it at Sony, and I've filmed here in Los Angeles ever since. Iron Man.
Inbound missile.
Bogey deployed flares.
So Zathura did not do very well. And even though it was a priority for the studio, I think it got fairly good notices, okay notices, but at the box office, it was just, and now I learned what that does. That sort of like really stalls your career. A lot of people worked hard, and I thought a lot of work was beautiful. Subsequently, now, of course, as people who are that age have grown up, we're in their 20s now. I sign a lot of DVDs, and they say how much it meant to them, and I'm very proud of it. But I learned later from Kevin Feige that it made me a perfect candidate for Iron Man, because Iron Man was the first MCU film. They were looking to make a film at a budget. We were used to working with Fox or other partners. They were going to do it alone, but they weren't going to spend a lot of money. And so I was a bit of an undervalued element to the thing. You definitely get affected by the failure commercially of your last project, but they saw the technical work that I had done in it, and they said, oh, he actually understands this stuff. It became a calling card for that. I had been trying to develop other projects that weren't going, and then finally this one came together, and that one was it was exciting. It was the one where I flipped from being very reticent about CGI to seeing what they were able to do with hard surfaces. Transformers had kept come out to it at the same time. So I said, all this metal, transforming metal stuff, super cool. We can make this guy fly. My relationship with ILM started, working on the CGI version of the character and with Skywalker Sound. My hero, George Lucas, Star Wars, the movie that arguably set me on my path at 10 years old into loving all of the genre stuff and learning about film and monomyth. And here I was now mixing sound up at his ranch. But the big thing was hiring Robert Downey Jr. It wasn't the type of film where, they felt that the hero, the mask, was going to be the star. So it wasn't the type of movie where you're paying for a high dollar movie star to front it. So now they were going to self-finance. And Robert was on the comeback. Of course, it was difficult to hire him. At first, there was pushback. They questioned his age for the role, too, to be honest with you, which is so funny now thinking about it, how many years ago it was. But Tony Stark was a character that should be older than Spider-Man. He was in a different position in his life. There was a lot of push and pull on that piece of casting. I know I met with Robert, and I saw in his eyes, he was like, he just made a very compelling case. I just saw it. He agreed to go and do a test, which I think you could even see.
Okay. Done. You're still Buckingham Palace. What do we got? What, I gotta break out the psyops? There it is. There's a smile. It's okay. Yeah, so it's natural. Less muscles to smile. Seriously. I gotta hand it to you guys. Every single one of you deserves a medal.
And he just made it undeniable. As a director, you're trying to get a take on something. And, it's sort of a little bit murky. And then the idea of Robert being Tony Stark, all of a sudden the fog cleared in my head. I knew every choice in the movie would be inevitable would make sense because that becomes your lighthouse.
I am Iron Man.
Everything was lining up. After I cast him, then Gwyneth, and you had all these other cast members coming on board. And so the film started to feel like, it could have been a cast of like a high-end independent film. And they were all funny too. And the chemistry, especially between him and Gwyneth, was wonderful.
Okay, now make sure that when you pull it out, you don't pull out there's a magnet at the end of it. That was it. You just pulled out. Okay.
Oh, God.
I was
Okay.
not expecting.
What
Don't
do
put
I
it back
do?
in.
What
Don't
do
put it
I-
back in.
What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm just going into cardiac arrest because you
What?
yanked.
I thought you
out
said this was
like a
safe.
trout.
We had Stan Winston again, who I'd met on Zathura, and built the chest with the hole. And Robert it's an old, magic trick where the head's there, but the body's fake. Found the comedy of it.
You're going to attach that to the base plate and make sure you...
But then there's also like a nice moment, a poignant moment at the end for their relationship.
Don't ever, 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 ever ask me to do anything like that ever again.
I don't have anyone but you.
So not only is it humor with heightening and transforming, but it's also landing a relationship story point to help you feel more. Because I think at the end of the day, with all these projects, if you don't feel something, then you've missed an opportunity. It's how you make people feel, especially if you make a lot of people feel something that they think is unique to them, but they realize they're sharing it with other people too. And I think that there's something about we're a communal species. We like to feel connected, especially right now. A lot of things are making us feel further apart. And I think people really appreciate coming together and sharing something. I'm happy that movies seem to be sticking around now because it's one of the few places where you go for that feeling. Iron Man 2.
Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to exit the donut.
Iron Man 1 was a bit under the radar. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but we were an underdog. It was coming out, around the same year as Nolan's Dark Knight, which was, a real high watermark commercially, creatively. So DC was still a bit dominant, but Marvel was like, oh, this is cool. It captured the tone of Marvel and the fun and the funniness. What I liked about it is that it was a lot like the relationship between the two comic brands. But the success of it led to Iron Man 2, which that's when I got to experience the other side of things, when it's like, here's the release date. The MCU was starting to fill out other things that were happening. So we weren't just the first thing alone, starting from scratch. There was The Incredible Hulk was coming out. There was a scene from Thor. They were filming Thor. And other things were starting to get threaded in that was working at the time. I didn't really understand completely to this Avengers crescendo.
Told you I don't want to join your super secret boy band. No. See, I remember you do everything yourself.
And also the mixed blessing of expectation based on past success. I found that the slot you want to be in is where there's limited expectation, you could exceed that. When the expectation's up here, that's keeping the belt. It's a lot easier to get the belt than keep the belt. So that became, it gave me a lot of perspective on the gig. And a lot of it, honestly, is learning how to just tune out the stuff, which is what other people expect or other people want. So on the one hand, you're leaning into your audience. You want to make them feel something. You want to connect with them. But by the same token, there's a lot of vocal expectation, whether it's from executives, whether it's from fans, whether it's from people you're collaborating with. Everybody has a different set of expectations. And you have to figure out how to tune out at certain points what might interfere with the creative process. Sometimes it's protecting the set from the outside world. Sometimes you're working with somebody who's very famous. Robert became much more famous. Their whole life shifts. These are all things that makes it a more complex thing than it was when you're just starting off and trying to build something from scratch. And on the other hand, we had to take the progression of Tony Stark, as forgetting all the Marvel stuff. What happens when you build this suit? The hearings where they try to take them with Gary Shandling, which is one of my favorite moments there.
Mr. Stark, please.
Yes, dear.
Can I have your attention?
Absolutely.
Do you or do you not possess a specialized weapon?
I do not.
You do not.
I do not. Well, it depends on how you define the word weapon.
But at the end of the day, it's Robert Downey Jr. and Gary Shandling going back and forth. It's just, you're watching, the final round at Wimbledon, and they're just two great players rushing the net. Because I come from comedy, with all the stuff, I still always spark to really talented, funny people, especially when they're making choices where there's a certain degree of spontaneity or improvisation involved. That's what gets me. That's what makes me lean forward as a director.
Suit and I are one. To turn over the Iron Man suit would be to turn over myself, which is tantamount to indentured servitude or prostitution, depending on what state you're in. You can't have it.
Look, I'm no expert.
In prostitution, of course not. You're a senator. Come on.
I learned people who have endured and been prolific over a long career have learned how to preserve the creative process and the smallness of that set and the smallness of their lives, even though everything else has gotten a lot bigger. And also helping others who were in that room do it. Learned a lot from Robert. Robert's been in a lot of movies. He tells me what he needs. Like, he likes it when you clear the whole set. Everybody's in a rush. Get to the set. Get into makeup. We got to get the first shot off. Everybody leave the room. Just the cast. Let's talk. Let's read through the pages. All right, let's bring in the department heads. All right, let's do a full rehearsal. All right, let's do the scene together. It's a creative rhythm that's, you set the tone. And Robert Downey was always good at understanding that he's hosting a party. He's hosting a dinner. That's what it should feel like. Cowboys and Aliens. Oh, we're out of time.
Or Spielberg.
I'm sorry. We ran out. Cowboys and Aliens was such a fun experience. I got to play with the Western genre, which I had grown to really appreciate, because I still think the Western represents a high watermark of mythic storytelling in American cinema. We're dealing with the same archetypes, and it's very much leaning into the monomyth and a story that has predictable characters and predictable storylines and settings. But it's a genre that's also inherently not commercial. And a lot of the archetypes and tropes of it were adopted in the 70s by films like Star Wars. The gunslinger is Han Solo in there. Cop shows, cop movies. Those were inheriting all of it because the Western no longer felt relevant after being the predominant genre. Many directors want to try their hand at the Western. And by mixing it with this mashup with an Alien movie, and also working with people like Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg, who were executive producers of this thing, working with the great Kurtzman and Orsi, with great writers, with Daniel Craig, Harrison Ford, great cast. And the artwork was beautiful. And I was coming off of the momentum. It was experience where it's like, oh, this is going to be commercial success. While we were in post on Iron Man 2, I was working on this at the same time. Because there's a long tail on those effects movies where you're not busy all the time, but you need to be attentive. And then pre-production, there's a lot of artwork and storyboards and previs. I started playing around with previs a lot, really planning, using technical tools to plan action sequences, and also working with people like Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg, who were executive producers of this thing. To have Steven Spielberg to be able to bring in and show what you're working on and have him tell you stories about how he designs aliens and creatures, and then come to the editing room. And he said things to me that I still remember and still repeat back. I've gotten to know him better since, but at the time, he's still this larger than life character. I remember Close Encounters, like it changed my life. And now here's a real person who's speaking to you, especially as a director, to give advice to another director. Wonderful. I remember with the visual effects, we put together this whole great, we storyboarded, previs, designed, had artwork, production art of the aliens coming in and snatching the cowboys off of the horses with lassos. And I show him the whole scene. We put it together. We have visual effects in there now. We're starting to really cook and go. He comes into the editing room. He says, that's so cool. He says, you got a lot of shots in there. He says, you got some of them are queens, kings, aces. Some of them are 7, 8s, 9s. Some of them are 5s and 6s. Now your job is to go in there and take all the aces and kings and queens, keep them in, and anything that's not that, either cut out or work on it and turn it into a jack or an ace or a king. The lack of preciousness, because we worked on these shots. We did all this stuff. It's so good. No, it's not playing right yet. You got to look at it from the perspective of the audience or fresh eyes. You got to only put your best stuff out there. It doesn't have to be a big menu, but everything on your menu's got to be good. Chef. So it all lines up very neatly when you're if you're watching a video here. But that time between Cowboys and Aliens and Chef was actually a pretty significant comma in my career. Although Iron Man 2 was successful at the movie theaters, it wasn't embraced as Iron Man 2 as much as Iron Man 1 was, and Cowboys and Aliens was both critically and commercially unsuccessful. There were other films that I was developing that didn't happen. So now here I was a director. Even though I had all this under my belt, everything kind of was grinding to a halt. I was doing things like directing TV pilots and doing commercials and things. I still feel lucky I get to do any of it, but as much as you get to be creative, there's always somebody over you telling you, I like that hat more than that hat, or let's recut that or cut that out. If you're doing a commercial for somebody, they don't care. You show them what your version is and they do what they want. Same thing for a TV pilot. I asked my agent, I said, what budget of a film would I have to make where I didn't have to listen to anybody creatively? I get to pick what color the hat is. And they gave me a budget. He said, from probably 11 to 13 million, you could probably do whatever. I was like, okay. And I wrote Chef.
Okay, 4 medium noches coming up. I got it. Got it?
I got 4 ready over here.
Pizza fries, and that says it was you? Yeah, here we go. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your patience.
I love food stuff. I love watching food. Food's very cinematic. Food's one of those things where it doesn't cost a lot of money to film it, but it looks for some reason, there's certain things very hard to do on film. A poker game is hard to make as interesting on film as it would be. Stand-up comedy is a hard thing to make it look as interesting. Hacking a computer, cooking is something that I think you get more out of cinema from.
Yes, you're so right.
You get almost like a synesthesia. You see something, you feel like you taste the thing, and maybe it's more about me, how I feel about, but I love watching people cook. I love watching the assembly of something being built. There's something about that progression that I like as an audience member. And so the idea of using a chef as part of to tell a story about the creative process. Also, I was really into watching cooking shows and Top Chef and things like that. So it was something I was interested about. When you're doing a movie, you got to be really interested in it because you got to learn as much as you can about it. And you're spending years dealing with it. And learning about cooking from Roy Choi. One of the perks of the business is you can learn things. If you say I'm making a movie about being a chef, you could reach out to somebody you never met and they'll teach, you learn how to cook with them. And to this day, I love cooking. And my first time acting in something that I wrote since made. Really, I had small parts in some of them, like Happy Hogan, but I didn't know at that age if I could still do that. Maybe that was a younger man's game.
I get to touch people's lives with what I do. And it keeps me going, and I love it. And I think if you give it a shot, you might love it too.
So all of it felt really, really nice. And then a lot of people like Robert and Scarlett, and Bobby Cannavale, John Leguizamo, they came in and were part of this. It just felt really nice to be working with people who were working on it to work with me on this. It was me figuring out knowing everything that I knew and having relationships with other people who would be cast members and writing alone in my room and making this small film. When you're writing, there's a lot of control. You have an idea. You could show it to people and go back and forth and get notes, but it's usually just a handful of people. You get to the set, even on a small movie, now you have department heads, you have cinematographers. They're going to bring ideas that are different than what you have planned. I come from a background of improvisation. You have to yes and that. You got to see what they're bringing and try to find what we call the game in the scene, which is like, what's the pattern that's emerging? How do you heighten and transform that? On a film set, it's not just your scene partner. A cinematographer could be doing that, or an editor, or a composer, or a costume designer. So I'm very collaborative with my department heads and try to hire people who know more than I do or about what they're doing and try to learn from them and try to give them a certain amount of autonomy.
Is that for us?
That's for us.
The whole thing's for us?
Can you believe that? Oh my God. All right, so I guess we got to cook some food.
It was a successful film for me because it got me creatively feeling my juices flowing. I connected with it. It was very challenging because we didn't have a lot of dough, but it caught people's fancy and was successful for what it cost. And so that's a big part of it too, is like success is dictated by the context often. So part of it's creative success, and that's a much clearer thing to track. But some of it is also financial success for your partners. No matter what you make, if it costs more than that, it wasn't a good business opportunity for these people. It connected with people. I was proud of it. I liked the tone of it, the message of it. I like being on screen and that kind of rule. And so to learn those skills and to present it and it just felt like a really celebratory film and experience. It was uplifting. And then that opened the door, the success of that for, I was popping up in festivals and doing things and more opportunities presented themselves. The Jungle Book.
I want to be like you.
The original may have been the first or one of the first movies I'd ever seen. So there was a very deep impression of the original. If I'm adapting something or remaking something, the first thing I do is I say, what do I remember about the original? And with Jungle Book, there was a handful of things. I remember Kaa the snake and the hypnosis. I remember Baloo going down the river. I remember Mowgli and him being friends. And also the original was so long ago that gives you a lot of room creatively. So I understood the tone and the vibe of the whole thing, and then the notion of actually building all of it digitally. It was exciting. By the time Jungle Book happened, now I was slowly adopting CGI, working with really good people and not asking more of the technology than it was really good at. We had ray tracing, which is a better lighting, lighting sims, fur design, muscular design, creature design, and starting to use these digital tools that had been developed for bigger budget movies that you could then inherit. And starting to really roll up my sleeves and be innovative in the process and creating blue screen stages, but having that actually be an element shoot. In other words, instead of going off and filming a whole movie and then cutting it together and figuring out what you had, let's instead build it almost like you would an animated movie. You build story reels. Animation's interesting because even though there's no stage, the physical execution of those shots is very expensive. And dating all the way back to Walt Disney, they would sweatbox these. They would look at pencils and get the story just right. And by the way, Pixar does the same thing. They would get the story just right until they ever rendered or painted a frame. And so we inherited that front end for Jungle Book and got it just right so that by the time we're actually filming, we were just shooting elements that would fit into a larger thing. So we actually cameraed the whole thing before we ever rolled anything. We didn't render things out and then change things afterwards. We figured it all out as you would on an animated movie. And we did it with pencils first and drawings. Then we started cameraing with virtual cameras on almost like a motion capture film. And then eventually we shot elements with the real live action actor.
Oh, how magnificent it would be. A gigantopithecus like me could learn to do like you humans do.
And so I learned a lot about the process and was innovative in how we did it to best utilize the tools that we had and then create this photorealistic end product while not driving the budget crazy because we made our creative choices when it was less expensive. The Lion King. So on Lion King, we wanted to build on what we had learned from Jungle Book. And it was at a moment also with Disney where there was they were really exploring where live action was going and how to best utilize properties that they already had from animation. And the notion of Lion King came up. What was interesting about that from a technical standpoint was now we had a chance to take it one step further from what we did. Remember in Jungle Book, we were shooting live action elements and then setting it into environments in camera. So we would see the backgrounds, but it was all done in, I think, Motion Builder at the time or Photon. One of these technical tools that required a tremendous amount of imagination to see what it would really look like. You're really just getting the layout. By the time we were doing Lion King, now the tools had come much further. And we were looking into doing everything completely virtually. But you still wanted the human performances. And so we would do kind of that black box theater where you'd film the actors and their performances and record their voices and get that as reference for the animators.
He's telling me what to do. His father's strength flickering inside.
And then you would build on top of that in this virtual 3D space. You would build the animation based on those voice performances as you would in a cartoon or in a traditional Disney animated film. And then we would build our volume and we would move our cameras. We would have physical camera operators to give everything a real analog feel. And we picked an aesthetic, which was kind of like a planet Earth nature type documentary with certain sequences that departed from it and got into bigger than life cinematography, but really trying to ground it in the rendering, the animation, and using the voices of the actors to help drive it.
Hakuna Matata!
What?
Most people get a bigger reaction when we say it okay.
Some people start clapping
Hakuna
immediately.
Matata.
But ultimately creating this completely virtual world that we could move cameras around within. And that was a big breakthrough technically for us. It was combining different techniques that had been used by other people, but combining it in a very unique way. In this case, the movie was very present in people's minds, especially millennials, who this was a foundational piece for them. And so you have a lot less creative wiggle room than you would for something like Jungle Book. There are people with very strong memories of the original Lion King. And so now you're presenting something new that's connected to what they love, but it's not exactly the thing. And one of the sequences that I really like in The Lion King, because it's not completely connected to what was in the old one and people's memories around it, is when Rafiki discovers that Simba's alive. Some hair or scent is carried on the wind and lands at Rafiki's tree, and he smells it and realizes that he has survived. But what we were able to do with Andy Jones and with our team and MPC was we built a whole sequence where we follow this little piece of hair that follows along a dung beetle, up catches the wind, it's carried by ants. Like, there's this really nice, really creative sequence that has the same story point, but it serves the story point in a way that's very new. Of course, Hans Zimmer's music plays underneath it, and you feel a lot.
He's alive.
And again, one of the great things about The Lion King, whether it's the original or the stage show or all the versions, because of the music and the visuals and the story, you feel a tremendous amount from that. And so that's something as a storyteller you want to preserve and inherit and not interfere with, and hopefully build on top of. Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu. So now remember, when we're talking here, we're talking about features, we're talking about movies, but it was 2019 and we launched The Mandalorian on the streaming format and did 3 seasons of that, as well as other shows that I had been working on in partnership with Dave Filoni. Television is more of a writer's medium, producer's medium, and I was writing a lot. I only directed, I think, 1 episode of all of them. Now is my chance as a director to come in and use that voice and that part of my skill set. But fortunately, I had the partnership of all the people that I've been working with. I've been working in the Star Wars world at this point, like 8 years. And that's its own very unique world, and it's a world that George Lucas created. So you're fitting into a context, and you're also fitting into many generations of audience members and fans that are slightly different. There's my generation that was 10 when the first film came out. There's the prequel generation, there's a sequel generation, there's the animated. So you're fitting into a context of a very large community, but they're also a very engaged community. When we got into The Mandalorian Grogu, we wanted to make sure that all the people who love the show or Star Wars, we could do something that would be great for them. But also, because the first time Star Wars movie was in theaters in 7 years, who's the audience that was too young to see Star Wars last time it was in the theaters, and they might know these characters? Maybe they saw it on TV before. How do you tell that story? And having this IMAX tall format, which was also a much different way to think about it. You're asking people to go to a movie theater after they've watched the show on TV before. You got to give them something. You got to give them something more. What I learned on Jungle Book and Lion King from a technical perspective, we're all combined in this because we had live action photography. We're actually building effects into video walls using this new technology we were innovating. But also now we were doing a feature. So I didn't want to rely on tools. I didn't have to rely on tools that were quick turnaround. But what I learned there helped me with things like interactive light, reflections, camera position, previs. And we got to build much bigger sets, go onto location. It kind of feels like animation in the beginning, like we did with the Lion King and Jungle Book. But there's also real actors that we bring in. We do motion capture. We use a little bit of everything. A little bit of Avatar, a little bit of Walt Disney, a little bit of George Lucas, all these things combining allows you to go on this ride that feels like what Star Wars felt like to me. Star Wars felt like something I'd never seen before. I also love that Star Wars affords me the ability to do all those things that I was curious about. The stop motion, I finally did get to work with Phil Tippett, who we were trying to reach out to on Zathura, and the stop motion that I was doing on Elf, motion control miniatures like I was doing on Zathura, all the things I was sort of playing with, and now we're getting to use all of them, the audio animatronics of the puppet. Star Wars affords you the ability to mix all these different techniques, and if it's a little bit funky, it kind of feels like Star Wars, whereas I don't think in a Marvel movie they would sit together as elegantly. And then, of course, state-of-the-art CGI and using all the tools that we learned on the show, which is planning and prevising and mocapping and preparation, and collaborating with a lot of people so that I get to learn from them. I wish I felt the way I do now when I was in school, because the older you get, the more you want to learn. It's a weird thing. I'm very fortunate that in my line of work, I get to still be a student and I get to teach too. I'm very grateful that I have been able to learn about filmmaking through watching other filmmakers talk about what they do and what's interesting to them and exciting. It's amazing how much of a human endeavor all of this is. There's a tremendous wealth of information available, whether it's in commentary tracks or interviews, not just the directors, by the way, the artists, the writers, the performers, the production designers. There's a film called Visions of Light, which is just conversations with cinematographers. Together you make the story. And it has to be coherent, cohesive. Movies have always been a very technical medium. It's always been storytelling, meeting the latest technologies, combining them. And I think it's very important for us to remember that this is still people telling stories to people. It's about what's interesting to you. It's about connecting with the people that you're making the movies for and who you're making the movies with. So I'm grateful every day that I get to do this stuff.